Okay, so maybe you're thinking about reading Catch-22. You know, that big war novel by Joseph Heller?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's got a pretty big reputation.
Yeah.
Brilliant satire, hilarious, but dark.
Right.
But also confusing,
Yeah.
and some say even problematic. So we're going to do a deep dive into all of that today to help you decide if Catch-22 is worth your time.
I think right off the bat, I'd say
Okay.
if you're drawn to sharp social commentary and
Yeah.
dark humor,
Okay.
and you're not afraid of a challenge,
Uh-huh.
then yes, Catch-22 is absolutely worth reading.
Okay, perfect, because I think that's where a lot of our listeners are at.
Yeah.
Intrigued, but hesitant. And one thing that keeps popping up in the reviews is the non-chronological storytelling.
Right.
A lot of folks mention that as a barrier.
Yeah.
Is that something to be worried about?
It's definitely unconventional.
Okay.
Heller kind of throws you right into this chaotic world of Yossarian, who's a bombardier in World War II.
Right.
And in this world, time feels as scrambled as his sanity. Okay.
But here's the thing. It's deliberate.
Okay.
Heller uses all these techniques like stream of consciousness
Yeah.
and flashbacks to mirror the psychological impact of war.
So the form of the novel reflects its content.
Exactly.
That's interesting, but isn't that just a gimmick? I mean, does it really add to the reading experience?
Well, think of it like this.
Okay.
Imagine a traditional war story.
Yeah.
Linear,
Uh-huh.
straightforward.
Yeah.
Would that accurately capture the disorientation, the
Right.
trauma,
Yeah.
the absurdity that Yossarian experiences?
I guess not. It makes sense that the way the story is told contributes to the overall effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Take, for example, the constantly shifting number of missions
Yeah.
that Yossarian needs to fly
Okay.
before being discharged.
Right.
It keeps increasing.
Yeah.
And it really represents this bureaucratic nightmare that he's trapped in.
Uh-huh.
This fragmented timeline actually embodies the Catch-22 itself.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. But another big concern that I'm seeing in the reviews is the portrayal of women.
Right.
Some reviewers even call it offensive.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile that with the book's brilliance?
This is where it gets a little tricky.
Okay.
And it's important to acknowledge that the novel is a product of its time.
Okay.
Written in the late 1950s,
Right.
published in 61,
Yeah.
the female characters are often underdeveloped, relegated to stereotypical roles,
Yeah.
and some of the descriptions are, by today's standards, problematic.
So should we just dismiss it as a product of its time and move on?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
There are a couple ways to approach this.
Yeah.
You could argue that the limited portrayal of women is itself a commentary on the hyper-masculine world of war.
Interesting.
A deliberate absence that highlights the absurdity of the situation.
So it's like their absence speaks volumes.
Right. Or you could acknowledge the problematic elements.
Yeah. While still appreciating the book's overall message and satirical brilliance, it's up to each reader to decide how much weight to give those criticisms.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about Catch-22 in isolation, but how does it compare to other famous war novels like, say, Slaughterhouse-Five? Some reviewers draw comparisons,
Right.
but they also highlight key differences.
Yeah. Both Catch-22 and Slaughterhouse-Five use dark humor and unconventional storytelling to critique war, but their focus is distinct.
Okay.
Slaughterhouse-Five, with its time-traveling protagonist,
Right.
really delves into the existential trauma of war,
Okay.
the impact on the human psyche.
So more philosophical and introspective.
Exactly. Catch-22, on the other hand, zeroes in on the systems.
Okay.
The bureaucracy, the illogical rules that perpetuate war.
Okay.
It's a satire of institutions and those in power.
So less about the emotional fallout and more about the absurdity of the machine itself.
Precisely. Think of Milo Minderbinder,
Okay.
the mess officer who creates this giant syndicate,
Oh, yeah.
trading with both sides,
Right.
even bombing his own squadron for profit.
Wow.
It's hilarious, but also chillingly insightful about war profiteering.
Yeah.
You won't find that kind of biting social commentary in Slaughterhouse-Five.
Yeah, and that speaks to Heller's genius, you know?
Yeah.
His ability to expose those dark undercurrents of war. Not just the physical violence, but the moral compromises, the dehumanizing systems that thrive in conflict.
So it feels like Catch-22 is operated on multiple levels. It's a gripping story. It's a hilarious satire. but it's also the sharp critique of power
Exactly.
and how it corrupts.
Exactly. And that complexity is why it's endured for so long. It's not just a simple good versus evil war story.
Right.
You know?
Right.
It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about how we rationalize our choices, about how we participate in systems, even when we know they're flawed.
Yeah, and all of this wrapped up in this nonlinear structure that at first seems confusing, but now hearing you explain it feels totally intentional. It's a puzzle, but a rewarding one. Think about how Heller reveals Snowden's death.
Okay.
This pivotal event that haunts Yossarian. We get fragments of the story scattered throughout the book, mirroring how trauma can resurface unexpectedly, how memories don't always play out in a neat chronology.
So even on a structural level, the book is reflecting the psychological impact of war.
Exactly.
It's making me think about all those other war novels I've read.
Yeah.
They all seem so straightforward in comparison.
It's a unique approach. And it's not for everyone.
Okay.
But if you're willing to lean into that disorientation, to let the pieces fall into place as Heller intends, it creates this incredibly powerful reading experience.
Okay, I am sold on the structure.
Okay.
The satire.
Okay.
But I still keep coming back to this female character issue. Is there anything more to say about that?
Yeah.
Or should we just kind of accept it as a flaw and move on?
It's definitely a valid criticism. But I think it's worth considering the historical context.
Okay.
Catch-22 was written in the 1950s.
Right.
Published in the early 60s.
Yeah.
Society's views on gender roles and representation were vastly different then.
So you're saying we should judge the book by the standards of its time?
Not necessarily judge, but understand. It's not an excuse, but it does offer context. And I think it's fair to say that even with those limitations, Heller still manages to create moments of sharp social commentary that go beyond just gender.
Like what? Can you give me an example of that broader social critique that goes beyond the book's limitations?
Think about the character of Colonel Cathcart.
Okay.
Yossarian's commanding officer.
Right.
He's obsessed with promotions, willing to risk his men's lives to advance his own career. That's not just a critique of the military. It's a commentary on ambition, on the dangers of unchecked power in any system.
So it's like Heller saying, look, this absurdity isn't just confined to war.
Exactly.
It's everywhere.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Catch-22 so relevant, even decades later.
Right.
We still see those Cathcarts in the world, those who prioritize their own advancement over the well-being of others.
That's true. And even with the limited female characters, there are moments where Heller hints at a critique of societal expectations.
Right.
Remember, there's Duckett, who Yossarian is attracted to. She's independent, assertive, and ultimately rejects his advances.
Yeah.
It's a small moment, but it suggests that even within the constraints of that time, Heller was aware of the complexities of gender roles.
Right.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It sounds like while the book might not pass every modern test of representation, it's more nuanced than just dismissing it as completely sexist.
Exactly. And I think that's the key takeaway here. Catch-22 is a complex work.
Yeah.
A product of its time, but also a timeless commentary on human nature and the systems we create.
So we've talked about the writing, the content, the historical context.
Right.
But we haven't really tackled the big question. Is it worth reading?
Yeah.
And who should read it?
That's the million-dollar question. And the answer depends on the reader. If you're looking for a straightforward, feel-good war story, this isn't it.
Yeah.
If you're easily offended by outdated social norms, you might want to skip it. But
there's a but coming.
If you're looking for a book that will challenge you intellectually, make you laugh out loud one moment, and ponder the meaning of life the next, then Catch-22 is an absolute must-read. It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish it, prompting you to question the systems around you, the choices you make, and the absurdity of it all.
That's a pretty compelling argument. Yeah. But I think there's still one piece of the puzzle missing. We've talked about how Catch-22 compares to other war novels, but how does it stand on its own as a piece of literature?
That's a great question. And it's important to remember that Catch-22 transcends the war genre. It's a satirical masterpiece that speaks to broader truths about power, bureaucracy, and the human condition.
Can you elaborate on that? What makes it more than just a war novel?
Well, think about how the term Catch-22 has entered our everyday language. It represents those paradoxical situations where you're trapped by illogical rules, damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yeah, that's true. We use it all the time. But I never really thought about where it came from.
That's the brilliance of Heller's work.
Yeah.
He took this very specific wartime experience and turned it into this universal symbol of bureaucratic absurdity that resonates with readers across time and cultures.
So it's not just about war.
Right.
It's about the systems we create.
Exactly.
The ways we trap ourselves and each other with these rules that make no sense.
Exactly. And that's why Catch-22 continues to be relevant today. It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant, to question authority, to fight against the absurdity that can creep into our lives, whether it's in the military, the workplace, or even our personal relationships.
That's a powerful message. It's making me think about, well, let's just say I'm starting to see the world through a Catch-22 lens.
And that's the beauty of literature.
Yeah.
It can open our eyes to new perspectives, help us understand the world around us, and even inspire us to change it.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here. The satire, the characters, the historical context, the comparisons to other war novels, and that lingering question of the female characters. But we haven't talked about the ending.
Right.
Without giving too much away, can you give our listener a sense of how the book concludes?
The ending of Catch-22 is as unconventional as the rest of the book.
Okay.
Yossarian, after enduring countless absurd situations and witnessing the loss of his friends, makes a decision that challenges the very foundations of the system he's trapped in.
So he doesn't just accept his fate.
He doesn't. He realizes that the only way to escape the Catch-22 is to reject the rules altogether, to find his own path to freedom and sanity.
That sounds pretty radical.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like for him?
Well, I don't want to spoil the detail.
Okay.
But let's just say that Yossarian's final act is both a rebellion against this absurd system and a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit.
That's intriguing. It sounds like an ending that will stay with the reader long after they close the book.
It does. And it's an ending that has sparked countless debates and interpretations, which is a testament to the book's enduring power.
So it's not a neat and tidy conclusion.
Right.
It leaves you with questions. With a sense of unease, but also maybe a glimmer of hope.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of Catch-22.
Yeah.
It's a book that stays with you, provoking thought and challenging your assumptions long after you finish the last page.
Okay. I think our listener has a pretty good sense of what they're getting into now. So for those who are ready to take the plunge, what's your final recommendation? Should they dive into the world of Catch-22?
If you're looking for a book that will challenge you, make you laugh, and make you think about the world in a whole new way, then absolutely yes, read Catch-22. It's a true classic for a reason.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. Think about the legacy of Catch-22. How has this concept, this term, permeated our culture? Where do you see Catch-22s playing out in the world today? And more importantly, how can we learn to recognize them, to challenge them, and maybe even break free from them?
Those are questions worth pondering. And they're just a few of the many insights that Catch-22 has to offer. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it really does feel like that. Like Heller's giving us this framework for understanding those moments where the rules seem totally rigged. No matter what you do.
And he does it with such wit and intelligence, you know? I think that's why Catch-22 has resonated with so many readers for so long. It's not just a critique of war or bureaucracy. It's a reflection of the human condition itself.
We've talked a lot about the book's strengths, but I'm also curious about its weaknesses.
Yeah.
Are there any aspects of Catch-22 that you think maybe haven't aged well?
Right.
Or that might turn off modern readers?
Well, we already touched on the portrayal of female characters, which is definitely a valid criticism.
Yeah.
Beyond that, some readers might find the humor repetitive. Or the nonlinear structure too disorienting.
So it's not a book for everyone. It demands a certain kind of reader, someone who's willing to embrace the challenge.
Exactly. But for those readers, it's an incredibly rewarding experience. It's a book that will make you laugh, it'll make you think, and maybe even make you a little bit angry.
Angry in a good way, I hope.
Definitely. Angry at the absurdity of the world, and the systems that trap us, at the Catch-22s that limit our choices and our freedom.
So we've explored the themes, the characters, the writing style. But before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to our listener.
Okay.
If they're still on the fence about reading Catch-22, what's the one thing you would say to convince them to give it a try?
I would say this.
Okay.
If you're looking for a book that will stay with you long after you finish it, a book that will challenge your assumptions and make you see the world in a new light, then read Catch-22. It's a classic for a reason, and it's more relevant today than ever.
That's a powerful endorsement. And on that note, we'll leave our listener with this final thought. Think about the legacy of Catch-22. How has this concept, this term, permeated our culture? Where do you see Catch-22s playing out in the world today? And more importantly, how can we learn to recognize them, to challenge them, and maybe even break free from them?
Those are great questions worth pondering. And they're just a few of the many insights that Catch-22 has to offer.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Catch-22. Thanks for joining us.